You both take a close look at emerging markets. It's Mark's specialty. It's a big part of your business, Sam. Brazil, Mexico, Venezuela in Latin America. If we look overseas, India, Pakistan, for example, North Korea, what should we begin with? You know what? Let's begin with North Korea.
Okay. I think it's one of those examples of the fact that we didn't deal with it 25 years ago. We kept, bending over to the North Korean administration, and now we're in a very threatening and very difficult situation, and I don't know what the answer is. But it's as dangerous as any place in the world.
I think at the end of the day, we have to have a dialogue with these people. That's why I was kind of pleased when Trump said it would be an honor to meet this guy. I mean, we've got to have a dialogue going and give him some respect. Because up to now, it's clear that up to now, nothing's worked.
You believe, I'm curious to know what you think about this, that we need to show some respect to a man whom we have good reason to believe isn't just a dictator, but potentially a mass murderer. How do we show respect to such an individual?
Well, how do we look at what happened in the past, where he agreed or his predecessors agreed to all kinds of things? We gave him fuel, we gave him all kinds of goodies, and then they reneged on everything. What would give you any thought to think that the scenario would be different today?
Not for me to judge.
Well, maybe I'm too cynical, but when somebody, lies and doesn't live up to agreements over a 25 or 30-year period, why would anybody assume that starting today they're going to pay attention?
Mark, how much of a risk, can we quantify the risk that North Korea, in the current state of affairs around North Korea, poses to, clearly it poses a risk to the world, but let's try to narrow that down to finance and investing.
It's a very big risk because it's in a situation where you're dealing with nuclear weapons, and that's very, very risky. By the way, this is a global risk.
Why isn't it being priced in? If you look at stock prices today, if you look at credit spreads today, and I'm not talking just about the United States, I'm talking about the developed markets and increasingly emerging markets. Things are doing pretty well. Why isn't anybody discounting this North Korea risk?
I think mainly because people realize there's not much they can do about it. So they say, okay, I've got to take that as a given. The world can be blown up with nuclear weapons, but life's got to go on, so I'll continue investing. But that doesn't diminish the risk. It just hides it, so to speak.
I'm aghast that the markets don't reflect the risk. And yes, Mark, I agree that this is a special situation because it's nuclear. But the reality is we have 40,000 U.S. troops that are subject to an artillery barrage that has nothing to do with nuclear. That would be devastating and extraordinarily high casualties.
Is there any way to quantify that risk? We're in the midst of a 300-point sell-off on the Dow right now, but the Dow is still close to 21,000. The S&P 500 is still close to 2,400. If we price that risk into the U.S. stock market, where should those indices be?
Well, I think it depends on what you think the risk is. I mean, the last 8 times they came up with some kind of a scenario to postpone facing up to it, only to be confronted with it again. So, it's a question of what is the risk.
Mark, could you put a number on it?
I couldn't put a number on it because, as I said, I think you've just got to have it as a given and then go on with what other valuations you're using.
Or another way to put it is, if the world goes up in smoke, what good are your dollars?
Not very good. Let's move on to other parts of Asia that you both take a close look at, particularly South Asia, the Indian subcontinent. There's the Prime Minister Modi has done quite a lot.
Yeah.
How do you look at it right now, Mark?
I think it's terrific what's happening in India because they're gradually bringing these states. You must remember, it's a federation of states that have been very, very divided. Now they're coming together, not only because of this tax law that they passed, but because of the internet and because the whole change is taking place in the communications between people in India, not only in India, but in other parts of the world. So I think it's a very exciting development.
I couldn't agree more, but I also would tell you that it'd be hard to find a place more difficult to do business than India. I mean, we spent, we spent 10 years looking for the right partner in India. We finally made one deal, which has gone along, and it's got great prospects, but it's slow. And the whole modus operandi in India has no sense of urgency.
So are you committing capital to India now?
Yes.
You are.
Yeah,
So
yeah. But,
the difficulty of doing business notwithstanding.
Well, we were always optimistic, you know. We always believe this time is going to be better or different. Remains to be seen.
And what about China? You know, it's an easy thing to sort of throw into a conversation, perhaps a much more difficult question to answer.
I think the difference, and this is a big difference, say, between Mark and I think he's much more involved in public stocks. I'm much more of a private equity investor.
If there were more market access to China, would you be active there?
No. We were very active in China about 10 years ago. And the point at which the Chinese generated enough internal resources that they didn't need us anymore, they forgot how to speak English. And I think that's still the case.
Mark, there's been a lot said about the risks, particularly in the Chinese credit and financial system. Are the Chinese beginning to find a way, they've taken some measures, to control those risks and to allow them to ease in an orderly fashion, or is there still, in your mind, the possibility, and perhaps we can try to quantify it, a risk of a disorderly unwind of excess leverage in the Chinese financial system?
At an individual company level, there's no question there are risks. So we've got to be very, very cautious. But when you look at the major state-owned enterprises, the major banks, there is no risk because this is a planned economy. The government decides what is going to happen to these companies, and whatever is required will be done. Just like in the U.S., I mean, the subprime crisis, eventually people were bailed out. In China, it's even more so. You have a situation where the government is looking at this risk and is planning for it to make sure that the major sectors of the economy do not get hit. But as an individual investor, you got to be very careful because you could get really hit badly on individual company level.
Aren't you showing an awful lot of confidence in the Chinese market?
Me or Mark?
This Mark.
Mark.
What's that again?
He wants to know. Ask him the question.
I just think you're showing an awful lot of confidence in the Chinese ability to execute.
Yes. Yeah.
That's, I don't know that history suggests that they're as good as you are supporting them.
Yeah. So far, so good. I think they've done a very good job, frankly.
Sam, one of the things that you've said recently, I'm going to move on. We could spend a lot more time on China, but I feel like we ought to touch, at the very least, on Venezuela and Brazil. Sam, you said that one of the things that this president needs to do is come up with a foreign policy for Venezuela, because the contagion risk from Venezuela is very real. You're concerned that it could begin to affect Brazil, which has a boatload of troubles on its own. Let's talk about that a bit more.
Well, I mean, I think even a better example is Colombia. I mean, Colombia and Venezuela have a big border. A lot of people from Venezuela are going into Colombia to shop for things they can't get in Venezuela. Venezuela comes apart some more, both to the south in Brazil and to the west in Colombia. I think there's a real risk of destabilization.
Destabilization, how? How is that going to manifest itself?
Well, I mean, we just got over this period of FARC, in Colombia, operating out of Ecuador to torment the Colombian people. When there is no rule of law or rules governing, you run great risks. And from an investor's point of view, that makes all of those countries suspect.
Mark, how do you think things play out in Venezuela?
Well, we were out. As soon as Chavez came in and said he was going to take over companies, we got out completely. So we're waiting now for the next change, which I think is imminent. I think there are going to be changes. Yeah.
How is that change going to be brought about?
Low oil prices are not helping them, so they've got to really think about how they're going to move forward to feed people, to clothe people, and to run the economy. And there's no question that there has to be a political change. When that takes place is the question.